Thank you, Shay. And I want to acknowledge that I am living, working, and learning on the beautiful and rich lands of the Gumbaynggirr people, and I pay my respects to the elders of the community, past, present, and forthcoming. And I acknowledge that this land is and always will be Aboriginal land. I'm here in Bellingen, down near Coffs Harbour, coming to you, missing the virtual PRAXIS, but very grateful that we can do it in this virtual form. I mean, did I say missing the real, the in-person PRAXIS, but grateful we can do it in the virtual form. So, with a nod, you can hear that I grew up in the United States. I've been in Australia 23 years, but with a nod to what's happening craziness over in my home country, this presentation is called Post-qualitative Research, Fake News or Real Research. So I'm from the School of Education, and my actual project, I'm in my third year of my PhD, and my project is called Moving Towards the Gynocene, Exploring the Lived Experiences of Women Environmentalists. So I have, with all my data collected, I'm currently in the analysis and writing stage. Last year at PRAXIS, I shared a little bit about the collective biography methodology that I've used to explore stories with two different groups of women, which I have classified as a post-qualitative research method. So this year, I thought I would share with you the interesting challenges of engaging in post-qualitative research. And as I was saying to Shay before this started, it was a struggle just to get this together. And I realized just to put it all together into my head, it's a good thing though, right? So before we even just start, I'm curious, what is the first thing you think about when you hear post-qualitative research? And I was wondering if you, even just like the first word that comes to your head or the first phrase, and if you want to type it into the chat here on the Zoom. Now, can I see that if the chat happens? Why can't I see the chat? That's interesting. Can you see the chat, Shay?
I can read it out to you.
Thank you. That's
from Greg.
Yeah.
Greg says, contributes post-structuralism. I've contributed non-reductive. Tilly has contributed unconventional. Teresa has contributed creative expressions.
That's cool. That's
Maya has contributed freedom.
That's awesome. Okay. That's really interesting. I hope I can get a copy of that chat afterwards, because I'd like to think about all those interesting phrases, some which I wouldn't have, yes, and which is the first time I've heard about that. Thank you for contributing that. So let's unpack a little bit about what post-qualitative research is or isn't. Thanks for that participation. So like I said, I feel like it's a real privilege to be able to present my research to my peers here at PRAXIS, but I also feel like it's been a really big challenge. I've been stewing on this presentation for days. I thought it was a good idea to discuss post-qualitative research because nobody ever really seems to know what it is when I talk about it. And the problem being is that sometimes I don't even myself know what I'm talking about. So that is why I thought it'd be helpful. What I do know about post-qualitative research, I will share with you today. And I will say to start with that I feel like it's found me, this methodology of research, and that the main thing, the key word that you think about when you think about post-qualitative research is emergent. Everything is emergent. Your aims, your methodologies, your analyses, it's all emerges as it goes. And it's incredibly entangled. So again, it's also entangled that to pick out 15 minutes worth of what it is and talk about it as a challenge. But I'm going to talk about today what it is a little and why am I doing it, and then kind of also how am I doing it. So a bit of a background. Post-qualitative inquiry as opposed to quantitative or qualitative research. As we all know, both quantitative and qualitative research has their own strengths and offerings. data sets and statistics help us understand how things work under certain conditions. Interviews, ethnographies, etc. Other qualitative, amazing methodologies help us understand human processes. And that's all very good and important work. But as I've come to understand, there are some conundrums in life that seem to be too complex and multi-layered to be understood thoroughly through either one of those methodologies or even a mixed methodologies. And so my research question of exploring the lived experiences of women environmentalists felt too big for either one of those methodologies. I came to my PhD as someone who has an absolute passion for this living planet. I've spent years of my life educating others about the environment. And I know that there are others, incredible number of people out there who love the natural world deeply. But through my teaching experience, I've always questioned why only a very limited number of these people actually end up actively advocating for the natural world as well as loving it. And so who are these people and what leads them down this path? And so 3 years ago when I started my literature review, there was no straightforward answers. It wasn't, getting kids out into nature or teaching them the facts or giving leadership skills and agency. There was so much research about what leads to pro-environmental behavior, but it didn't seem like anybody had one definitive linear answer. And I realized, well, that's because there is none, right? So no matter how many statistics were quoted, there was no one answer to that question of what leads to pro-environmental behavior. So then somehow I found post-qualitative inquiry. It's all a vague blur now, but it basically post-qualitative inquiry offers us a way to explore wicked problems. So these issues and conundrums that are so entangled and complex that they can't be separated out into data sets or individualized stories. Post-qualitative research is actually quite a recent development in academic research. Elizabeth St. Pierre is an academic, a US academic, who she writes that she coined the term actually, post-qualitative inquiry, in 2010, so that's only 10 years ago, when she realized that qualitative research had, quote, reached its limits as it failed to do justice to the complexity of the world. So how does post-qualitative research then do justice to the complexities of the world? Basically, number one is post-qualitative research is grounded completely in theory. So this quote that I have up here is St. Pierre saying, the post-qualitative researcher must live the theories, will not be able not to live them. The long preparation for post-qualitative inquiry is reading, thinking, writing, and living with theory. So sorry about too many words on the slide. I hate that. I never teach like this with too many words on the slide, but some of these quotes are too beautiful not to share with you. So not only is post-qualitative inquiry grounded completely in theory, so that's your starting point, but hardcore post-qualitative academics like St. Pierre say there is actually no methodology that can be truly classified as a post-qualitative methodology. So these are her words again: the experimentation required in post-qualitative inquiry cannot be accomplished within the methodological enclosure. This experimental work is risky, creative, surprising, and remarkable. It cannot be measured, predicted, controlled, systematized, formalized, described in a textbook, or called forth by pre-existing approved methodological processes, methods, and practices. The post-qualitative inquirer who has prepared herself must trust herself and do the next thing, whatever it is, to experiment and to keep moving. Yeah, so my thing's always been like, oh my gosh, what is the next thing? It's been a real struggle. And I see Shay laughing too, because it's kind of like, what is the next thing? Okay, trust yourself. What is the next thing? Don't know. But you keep going. I also want to say that if just to kind of summarize, besides grounded in theory, refusing concrete methodologies, post-qualitative inquiry, also one of its most important characteristics is that it decenters the human. It allows the other than human, more than human elements of this planet to come into the research. It recognizes the agency of the other than human. It recenters the collective. It kind of refuses the binary or individualized way we live in the Western world now. It foregrounds entanglement, saying that every single thing is connected somehow. And it also acknowledges the partiality of our knowing. Post-qualitative inquiry is never going to come up with a definitive answer, which might be a problem for some PhDs. I'm kind of see where that takes me. So to simplify or to summarize, post-qualitative inquiry decenters the human, instead recognizing the agency of the other than human, looks at the fascinating place where material discursive phenomena meet up and entangle with each other, entangling matter and meaning with theory. It replaces individual and binary epistemological assumptions with understandings of the collective amongst humans and more than humans. Basically, it's all about interconnection, entanglements of matter and meaning, human and non-human. That's the getting down to the one sentence. Why am I doing post-qualitative research? I gave a little bit of backstory already, but like I said, I didn't really even know what post-qualitative research was when I started this whole gig, because I came out of the teaching world. I didn't come out of the academic world at a late age. But once I narrowed down my focus to the stories of women environmentalists, I knew that neither quantitative or traditional qualitative methodologies were for me. And then I found the theories of Karen Barad, who is a feminist quantum physicist, actually, and her theory of agential realism. When I read that, everything clicked into place about the way I look at the world, the way I look at my teaching, both pedagogy and practice. And I started understanding that I needed to do my research through this theory. So then when I understood that post-qualitative research was doing research through a theory, it all kind of came together. Barad's theory of agential realism posits that all elements, both living and non-living, human and non-human, have dynamic agency that is constituted from within the collective entanglements in which they exist. So again, everything's interconnected, and that is how I would need to inquire into this question. And also, Barad says, she actually posits this as an ethical stance. So she actually puts ontology, epistemology, and ethics together into an ethico-onto-epistemology. And she says you can't separate those. So yeah, this is from her seminal book called Meeting the Universe Halfway. Interactions reconfigure the possibilities for change. In fact, interactions not only reconfigure space-time matter, but reconfigure what is possible. Ethicality is part of the fabric of the world. The call to respond and be responsible is part of what is. There's no spatial temporal domain that is excluded from the ethicality of what matters. Basically, everything matters. So in my research, when I look at the lived experiences of the women that I'm working with, it's not just, thanks Shay, it's not just their individual stories, it's how we've told our stories to each other. It's the place that we gathered to tell the stories to each other. It's the weather on that day. It's the chairs we were sitting on. And then it's all the ensuing emails back and forth, the conversations, the meetings again. And so when I'm going to be writing about the lived experiences of women environmentalists, yes, of course, individual stories will pop up and individual comments will pop up, but what I'm looking at is the collective entangled experience of what we created together in telling our stories. So finally, how am I doing this post-qualitative research? I just said a little bit about how it is, but I did find collective biography, and although, you know, hardcore post-qualitative researchers like St. Pierre say no to methodologies, other theorists say there are methodologies that you can use to do post-qualitative research. Collective biography is one of those. It was a methodology created by Bronwyn Davies and Suzanne Gannon about 15 years ago. And it's a very emergent methodology because I have taken what they use as collective biography, but I have adapted it at each step of the way. And I've actually had the luck to be able to talk to Bronwyn Davies about it, and she encouraged me as well. And she's like, no, you can't take what we wrote about and did about it, collective biography. You have to adapt it to your own experience because, it's only particular to your particular group of women. So it's taken on a life of its own, and new understandings have emerged, and that's part of what I'm be writing about, like the next version of collective biography. So just to summarize, the post-qualitative research, how I'm doing it, I'm using a Baradian theoretical framework, I'm using a collective biography methodology, and for my analysis, I am using a diffractive analysis that's also based in Barad's work in quantum physics, and that's a whole nother topic. Maybe next year at PRAXIS I can talk about diffractive analysis. But to summarize, post-qualitative research methodology acknowledges the conundrum of trying to study and report in a world that is always already entangled. So is post-qualitative research fake news or real research? By its very nature, there's not even an answer to that question. I'll leave it over to you. Thank you for your kind attention, onwards and upwards. And there's my references. And that's me. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lisa. Absolutely wonderful. And research that's very, very dear to my own heart. So it was delightful listening to you. May has asked a question and then she's written, oops, I think you've answered it, but perhaps you could expand on the question. With your human participants, I'm interested, May is interested to look, pardon me, how are you decentering the human? And what does that look like for you all?
Yeah, that's such a good question, Maya, and it's something that I've really grappled with a lot because I'm like, oh, I'm trying to do, decenter the human, and yet my whole thing is about women's stories. And then I thought, okay, decentering the human doesn't mean ignoring the human, right? Obviously, I'm human. I teach humans. I love humans. And so I think we need to be aware of, like, my tendency was like push the human away and only center on the the other than human. So what we've done is in our storytelling, in our shared stories, I talked to the women about other than human, and I invited them to bring in other than human elements in their stories. And then what I've done as part of my analysis is I've tried to rewrite the women's stories in my own words, but looking at their stories, what were the other than human elements that came through really, really strongly? So one woman talked about her experience with a tree. So that whole story was like her sitting in a tree. I don't know. It's a pretty complex space because, like I said, we are humans, so we can't, decenter.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many layers to it. It's like, where do you stop?
Yeah. I guess my main thing is I make an effort to also privilege the other than human any chance I can get, and I also. And we had some really interesting discussions with the women about that, so that they were like, oh yeah, and it's not just like animals. Like one woman, she didn't feel like she grew up as with any environmental awareness at all. But then when she went back and started telling her story, it was about that her family got like a big piece of furniture and they had this big plastic bag, and she had been walking to and from school as a child and seeing all this litter on the side of the road. And so she asked her mom, can I have that big plastic bag and just pick up the litter on the way to school? And by the time she got to school, she had this big bag of litter. A teacher noticed it. got her up on stage and commended her. She was a person who never did anything really good in school. So all of a sudden this kind of agency awoke in her. And that, but that would never have happened without that plastic bag, you know? And so we really talked about that. It wasn't just like, maybe other people would have just heard the teacher gave her agency, you know, and well done teacher and well done to her. But actually the plastic bag needed to really be acknowledged in this story.
And the rubbish too, yeah.
And the rubbish, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I guess
I can't wait to hear more of the stories. Can't wait.
Amazing. Yeah. Thank you,
absolutely. It's very interesting what you're saying about acknowledging the non-human entities that are actually involved in the process, and so fascinating that that's actually emerging for your participants in the process of them telling their stories. How's that experience been for you of the process of not just you uncovering things, but uncovering things for your participants and their learning as well?
Yeah, well, part of the emergent methodology was we were telling stories, we told stories, and then it was really interesting because everybody immediately tried to find common themes, you know, and relate to each other. And oh, we did that too, I did that too. And then, so then I kind of started going down this real track of interpretation. Oh, we all have this in common. I was like, you know what, that's all been proven already. Like, you know, that we have we're all women environmentalists anyways. So of course we all love nature, we all love it. What we did then is, as a group, we took a step back and there were 13 of us. So we each chose 6 people, and this is a whole nother talk, but we chose 6 stories to diagram and then come up with things that weren't immediately obvious about interactions with the other than human world or agency or whatever, and then choose something that was so not obvious to begin with and write about that. And what happened was then people started having these really interesting aha moments about themselves through their stories, entanglement with other people's stories. I need a whole nother presentation day to explain it, but it was really cool because I personally made a really big had a really big understanding about my own environmentalism, but only because I was writing about grandmothers, because there were a bunch of people that wrote about grandmothers. I was writing about grandmothers and agency, and all of a sudden I went boom, but it was only because of the collective entanglements of the whole group stories that I came up with that own personal knowing. So I'm looking at that as a teaching tool that I'm going to write about that. And but it could only happen through the collective, and it could only happen through the emergence of the methodology.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing that's very, very exciting, and there's a couple of other comments in the chat there which I'll read out, is that how to actually engage and give space for expression of the non-human entities and the more than human is an approach that's emerged through your work, because as you've explored that and your participants have explored that, what you're doing is uncovering that as an approach to engaging in that way, which is really incredibly exciting. There's comments here from Maya. Yes, because so much is lost when we focus on similarities only. And from Gurmeet, it's really wonderful to hear more about these stories. Thanks, Lisa, for sharing. And from Tilly, I really liked the way you framed it, Lisa. So thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you for pushing the edges of inquiry and research. Well done. Thank you for your presentation. Okay, everybody, we have a very short break. And be back at just before midday. Come in a couple of minutes before, please. I'm ready for Tilly's presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Shay.
Awesome. Let's talk some more about diffractive analysis, and let's have a whole conversation about that.
Sounds really good. And I've been talking to Tilly about that too, so we might hop on with you, Shay.
Yeah. I'm sure.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, I'd love to chat about
I'm
that
interested
too.
in getting a primer of what diffraction is in this
Yeah,
situation.
totally.
Oh, yes. Well, lots bubbles along when we start talking about diffraction.
Okay, if no one's desperate to go now, you could continue the conversation for like 7 more minutes.
Yeah, let's do it. Tell us what you understand about it, and I'll chip in, and we can have a bit of a chat.
On me, what I understand.
I'll hand it back to Lisa first,
Yeah, okay.
and then we'll go round.
Nate's going, what?
I didn't want to put you on the spot there, Nate.
Well, that's what I'm really working with right now. Like that's what I'm in the middle of. And I think the main thing is that, well, I did this whole analysis where I thought was super diffractive and sent it to my supervisors, and Amy was like, gong, that's interpretive. And then I had to go back. What's that?
What did you do that was not?
Oh, it was just totally, when I look back at it, I'm like, yeah, it was totally like finding similarities, but I was bringing in the other than human world. And so it was kind of like, I thought I was being super diffractive. It wasn't at all. Basically what I'm doing is I'm analyzing through writing. So I'm just writing, trying to like analyze my stories, and I am trying to, this is how I'm visualizing it. I'm reading over my transcripts and stuff, and the whole time that I'm reading my transcripts, I'm looking out of the corner of my eye for what isn't there. I don't know how to describe it other than that. And so what happened, for instance, was I'm reading, and then I realized that what wasn't in my stories at all, the women's stories, was anything about them being women, right? They had talked about how they became environmentalists. They didn't really talk about how they become women environmentalists. Gender was completely backgrounded. And it was only when I said to myself, diffractively, what's missing? Like, what's missing? So what I did was I took the stories and I looked at it through agential realism. And anyways, I'm not explaining it very well, but it was only when I asked what's missing from this story that I found what was missing. I'm not explaining it.
So is that, this is just a question, is that related to what Nate was asking about what diffraction is? It relates to the analogy of when you have patterns coming together and some aspects of them resonate together and create the peaks in a diffraction pattern, and some aspects of it come together and cancel out and create the troughs. So when you're talking about what is missing, are you talking about
The
what
troughs.
is cancelled out and disappeared? And you need to pay attention to that as well.
Yeah.
What
Thank
is
you, that's
unsaid,
perfect.
what is not present,
Yeah.
what as I said, has cancelled each other out. And so that part of the patterning drops out
Yeah.
to become
Yeah,
the
exactly. Thank you, Shay. You can write that section of my PhD.
So that gives it a very visual pattern of what a diffraction pattern looks like, the bits that come together to create the peaks. And the bits.
Oh, sorry, this is a very amateur question, but how is that different to like a sense of finding, the concepts which are, but what you talked about being interpretive, finding what's in common, finding the concepts that overlap?
Perhaps you're just looking for the peaks if you're doing that. What do you think, Lisa?
Yeah, I'm just getting up my my draft of, there's something I wrote in here that I'm saying diffractive analysis is the points where entanglements meet.
I'm doing my theoretical ecology of my work is diffractive in the sense that I have 3 main areas of theory, and I'm looking at where they interact and have things that relate to each other and where there are absolute differences.
Mm-hmm. So it's...
I love that, Shay, theoretical ecology. When I heard you say that after I'd finished my PhD, I was like, oh, that is so beautiful. I worked with 3 theories and did that as well, looked at similarities and you know, divergences, but I called it a theoretical assemblage, but theoretical ecology is just beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just looking over my chapter that I'm writing about it, but there's nothing that comes to mind to share right now.
I'm just going to speak for 15 seconds and then say if I'm on track or not. Whereas traditional ways of looking at it would be like, this part of the theory is the same and this part of the theory is the same, and that's the space that we operate in. What we're moving towards is instead understanding that, you know, these are these theories that have length, they have dimensions to them, and yes, these bits overlap, but there's all these other things that don't overlap, and it's this mobile, multifaceted thing that we can't just limit it to all these bits are the same, so let's stay here where it's safe. That's what I'm getting. And am I on the right track? Or
Yes, absolutely, to my understanding.
And also the thing that occurred to me also is that it's the other thing that I've been doing is everything that I look at, I'm like what I was saying in my presentation, I'm looking at it through the theory of agential realism, so through the theory of the fact that everything is entangled, rather than looking for things that sit next to each other as similar. I'm looking at the way they entangle themselves. So like every single thing that I look at is through that mode, rather than trying to find similarities. I'm trying to find where they meet, where they
co-constitute perhaps, Lisa.
Yeah, where they create each other. So like that example of, you know, the story with the woman with the plastic bag, that understanding that the plastic bag and the girl and the rubbish created an entanglement that then manifest in some form of moving forward into identifying as a women environmentalist. Whereas maybe if I was looking at it through a more interpretive thing, I would be like, you know, we know that when children, you know, are encouraged to pick up rubbish, you know, this class of children picked up rubbish and therefore they became, I don't know, like, you know, finding patterns or historical patterns even, like, or something like that. So does that make sense?
It's almost like, sorry, and again, I'm such a newcomer to this that, sorry, just putting things out there of how I'm saying it. Interpretive is trying to limit the variables to the things that can be really easily compared, whereas diffraction is you're trying to keep the complexity of the original product while still having these meaningful conversations.
Yeah, that's so nice.
Yes.
We need to write that down.
Oh. We're having a go at it, Nate. We're having a go. We're attempting.
Yeah, I mean that. I'm starting to, I think, get to grips of what it means.
But it's that, as Lisa said, it's the realization that you can't fit what you're engaging with into a smaller space. Oh, so you have to try and yes, beautiful. I'd love to continue this conversation, but we do need some time.
Can I just say one quick thing? Is before when I said that thing of looking for what's missing, it's not so much looking for what's missing, because that implies that there's a hole and a missing part over there. It's more looking for a thread of entanglement that I hadn't noticed before, I guess, is more how I want to say it. And that to me is a diffractive analysis, where you see what you have and then you're looking for other threads of entanglements that you hadn't noticed before.
That's beautiful, Lisa.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. A perfect way to end. Thank you very much, everybody. And now